Hi, I'm Jennifer Branch. I sketch all the time using a dip pen and ink, but sometimes I want something a little bit easier. So I contacted the nice people at gouletpens.com and they recommended a Noodlers Nib Creeper. And this has an extra fine point, and I am using Noodler's black ink with it. So let me show you about sketching with the fountain pen. This is the ideal paper for this, and notice how this has a very thick stroke or a very thin stroke, and I'm holding the nib exactly in the same direction. So big, thick, a little bit of lathering if I press too hard, very thin. And that means I can sketch anything that I happen to want. Just scribbles. So this is how it works on optimal fountain pen paper. But we're not going to be sketching on optimal fountain pen paper. We're going to be sketching on something a little bit rougher. So here's watercolor paper. And notice it's going to have more hit and miss strokes. But that's good because it's like a dip pen that way. So if I'm doing, sketching a little house or maybe a little tree on the side, it doesn't hit and miss as much as a dip pen would, but I can get big, deep lines, and sometimes I have to scribble a little bit, but if I put the pen down very firmly, I can get a really, really thick line with this, and then it runs out. So you just pull it and say, okay, a little bit more. And that means that the nib is running out of ink. I love how this fountain pen works. So I'm going to show you what I might do if I was sketching in Venice. Here's a really pretty painting, and I'm going to embellish it with a little bit of fountain pen, just like you might do on location. Let's paint. I'm using Saunders Waterford paper, and I want a nice rough press paper so I can get lots of the hit and miss pen and ink strokes later. This, the background, it is such a mix that I couldn't put down a paint name. Let's speed things up a little, but I'm using a lot of nickel Azo Yellow, I'm using some Cobalt Violet, I'm using a little bit of Cobalt, I'm using Cobalt Teal. It's everything in there, really about 7 colors or so in the entire painting. So don't worry, lots of paints, but still the limited palette that I always do. Some bright greens here is really going to show. It's the algae growing along the sides of the palazzo, and it's just going to make that pale stone really show up. And the darks here, lots of Quinacridone Rust and Ultramarine Blue in that. So I'm just moving with the shapes of the objects that I'm painting. Going along and painting the water movement and the very plain pale stone and all those rusty streaks kind of mirrored in the rust there, and then the interesting little shapes up here. Just some fun darks in there, and you really go and get it with the darks. I want very, very strong darks, but not detailed darks, because I'm going to put the detail in layer with the fountain pen. And what's great for the pen, if you're doing that on location, is that you don't have to do the extra washes. You can limit it to 3 washes. You can add a little extra detail at the end and get some really strong dark emphasis and not have to worry about painting every single tiny detail, but you still can get in the detail. That way you can get the colors right and all the information you need to make a great travel sketch or a great planning a painting sketch. And you have everything you need, but you didn't spend a lot of time doing it, because really when you're on location, most of us have a limited amount of time we can paint. And, as much as we want to paint all the time, every single day, and never stop, we have other things that we're doing. We have a limited time. We're at a location, and So anything we can do to kind of speed that up a little, a fountain pen is one of those useful things in your toolbox. So I used them for years. I really love dip pens, but for on location, this is probably better. So anything to speed stuff up while still preserving everything that you want it to be. So I'm still going here and I'm doing a little bit of the detail and especially the color work and the shadows and all that with my brush. A larger brush is really useful for on location. And it's great if you can add a couple of the details with a rigger, either a number 1 to number 4, nothing larger than that. So all this intricate stonework, it's just so much fun to paint. It's beautiful. Yeah, it reflects all the colors around it. It has rust marks going down it and all the algae growing at the bottom at the water line, and it's just fun. And then the intricate stone carvings like this. The trick is, remember, all the detail will only be on one side. And now it's time for the fun of a fountain pen. Let's scribble some. I'm using the Noodlers Nib Creeper that I showed you because it has a very flexible nib. I'm using an extra fine point. I really prefer, for forever, I prefer any kind of pen in a very fine point because I get more options that way. With a wider point, a medium-sized point, that's the smallest you can go, but you can always build up on it to make more layers. Okay, if you're working with a fountain pen, always make sure that you have a scratch paper pad on the side. It can just be, I use regular old Blick sketch pad, has a little bit of a tooth, but less than the watercolor paper. And that way, if you run into the railroading issue, I think I called it laddering, but it's railroading issue where it separates, you can restart the ink flow very quickly. Before you started drawing, always make sure that your pen is full of ink, and then be sparing. Only do a couple details. It's just like painting, where you only do the details you want to emphasize and you don't worry about the rest of them. So I am obsessed, as you can tell, by the intricate moldings, and I really like showing those with the pen and ink, or just all those wrought iron detailing, the railings and the bars on the windows and all of that. Well, that clearly has to be done in fountain pen with black ink. There's no other choice. Oh, I'm still using the Noodler's black ink. What's really great about it is that it's waterproof. I think they call it bulletproof. So there I'm using the scratch pad and kind of getting the ink flow going a little bit. I want some nice dark strokes around the base. And this area that I'm painting on, that I'm drawing on, is still a little wet, so the flow is a little bit more variable. And in areas that are drier, I, can just draw on it. I don't usually have to get the flow restarted. So here, notice how I didn't quite do all the way, This isn't an architectural pen and ink. This is a pen and ink and wash or whatever of architectural drawings. It's not ink and wash. That's when you put the watercolor. It's a ink embellishment of a sketch. And there's no point in doing it in the darker areas. And don't forget, you can kind of use it for negative. If I had gone back into that dark area while it was still wet, because it's had time to dry, if I'd gone back in there when it was still wet, it would have pulled some of the paint out and left light lines where, the nib scratched the surface of the paper. Well, that's fun too. So there's a lot of options here where you can really play with it. Just a couple areas I want to emphasize the shapes. And that's about it. I hope that gave you some ideas for some things you can do with the fountain pen. It's perfect for little sketches on the go, and I really like the flexible nib of the Noodlers Nib Creeper. Thank you very much for watching. For more information, please visit my website at paintingwatercolor.com, and I have lots of other tutorials for you to watch. I hope you have a great time painting this weekend, and maybe try a little fountain pen in the mix. Happy painting!